Colonel James Hartley had spent 32 years serving his country, and now at 54, he craved nothing more than silence. The palace assignment seemed perfect: groundskeeper and general caretaker for the royal estate's outer gardens. Quiet, simple, forgettable. He didn't expect the fox pups. "They're absolutely uncontrollable," announced Duchess Victoria Ashford, the palace's head of operations, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she led him through corridors adorned with centuries of royal portraits. The royal family brought in a litter from the wildlife sanctuary. They thought it would be charming. It's been a nightmare. James nodded, taking in the opulent surroundings with mild indifference. Royal drama had never interested him. What interested him was a paycheck and a cottage on the grounds where he could live out his years in peace. "We need someone patient but firm," Victoria continued, her sharp gray eyes assessing him. "Someone who won't be intimidated by their antics." That afternoon, James met them. 5 fox pups, ranging from rust-colored to silver-tipped, tumbling to the royal nursery like furry chaos agents. They'd already destroyed 2 velvet cushions and scattered a basket of toys across the stone floor. "Easy now," James murmured, crouching down. He'd never been one for unnecessary words, but the pups immediately paused, heads tilted, ears perked. One, the smallest, with white-tipped ears, approached his extended hand and sniffed carefully. Victoria watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Over the next week, James established a routine. He'd arrive each morning to find the pup's enclosure breached somehow, a latch mysteriously undone, a panel nudged aside. And each time they escaped, they did the same thing. They'd find him, whether he was pruning hedges in the garden or sitting on the cottage steps with his morning coffee. They'd appear, tumbling over themselves to reach him. Then they'd curl up on his lap, one or more, and sleep peacefully for hours. The palace staff was baffled. The head nursemaid, a woman named Elsie who'd been managing royal children for 20 years, threw up her hands in exasperation. "They won't do it for anyone else," she told him one afternoon, watching as 3 pups snored softly across his knees while he read a newspaper. "Not for Victoria, not for the royal family, not for the handlers we brought in. Just you." James didn't have an explanation. He'd never been particularly fond of animals. His military life had precluded attachments. But these creatures seemed to sense something in him, a stillness, perhaps an absence of pretense. What he didn't know was that this observation was being carefully noted. In the palace's upper wing, in the private study of King Edmund and Queen Isabel, conversations were taking place in hushed tones. Victoria had been watching James for weeks, documenting everything. The Queen had smiled knowingly when hearing the reports. "He's the one," she'd murmured to her husband. "The pups recognize it before we do." James remained oblivious, content simply to exist alongside the creatures who seemed to have chosen him. He didn't know about the royal conspiracy, about the secret the pups carried, or that his quiet life was about to become far more complicated. The smallest pup, the one with white-tipped ears, nuzzled deeper into his lap and sighed contentedly. James reached down and stroked her soft fur, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. He had no idea that within 2 weeks, his presence would be crucial to protecting the crown itself. 3 weeks into his assignment, James received an unexpected invitation. Queen Isabel wanted to meet him formally. His first instinct was to decline, but Victoria's sharp look made clear that wasn't an option. The Queen received him in her private parlor, a room that managed to be both grand and surprisingly intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that stretched toward distant hills. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps mid-50s, with kind eyes and an air of genuine curiosity. "Colonel Hartley," she said, extending her hand, "I've heard remarkable things about you." James shook her hand briefly, uncomfortable with praise. "Just doing the job, ma'am." Queen Isabel smiled. "You're being unnecessarily modest. Our pups have never bonded with anyone like this. It's unprecedented." She gestured for him to sit. "Tell me about your military service." Over the next hour, something unexpected happened. The Queen asked intelligent questions, not from a place of idle curiosity, but genuine interest. James found himself talking about things he'd never discussed. not the violence or trauma, but the philosophy of leadership, the way to protecting others, the hollow victory of survival. You have kind eyes, Isabel said gently, despite everything you've seen. That's rare. After he left, James was troubled. He'd said too much. Vulnerability was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford, and old habits died hard. That evening, he was summoned again, this time to the royal gardens after dark. He found not the queen, but someone unexpected. A woman stood by the fountain, silhouetted against moonlight. Dr. Amelia Reeves, the palace physician and the queen's closest friend. Her Majesty thought you might appreciate company, Amelia said, her voice warm with barely concealed amusement at the obvious setup. And I thought the gardens were lovely at night. James wanted to be annoyed at the manipulation, but Amelia was disarming. She was in her late 40s, with chestnut hair streaked with silver and an intelligence that matched her beauty. She moved through the gardens as if they were her own, pointing out constellations and speaking with ease about topics ranging from ancient history to modern medicine. They talked until midnight. No romance, just connection. You're wondering why the queen set this up, Amelia said as they prepared to part. She's perceptive. She saw you watching me earlier in the week. James had been obvious. He'd noticed Amelia during a palace function, the way she moved, the brightness in her laugh. She's also meddling. Amelia continued with a slight smile. But she means well. Over the following weeks, they arranged to meet regularly. Nothing inappropriate. Long walks, conversations in the library, shared meals. Yet with each encounter, James felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd sealed away decades ago. One evening, they were alone in the palace gardens when Amelia asked, "What are you afraid of?" James considered lying. Instead, he said, "Everything, caring about something I could lose." Amelia stepped closer. "That's the price of being alive, James." She kissed him gently, a question and an answer at once. What neither of them knew was that they were being observed, not with malice, but for a crucial reason. The palace's security systems had flagged something unusual. Someone had been accessing restricted areas. The royal family suspected an inside threat, and they needed someone they could trust absolutely. The Pups' behavior had been the first test. James's character had passed the first examination. Now came the dangerous part. A week after his first kiss with Amelia, James was called to the king's private study. This time, the entire royal family was present. King Edmund, Queen Isabel, Princess Eleanor, and Prince Matthias. Victoria stood near the door, her expression grave. "Colonel," the king began, "we need to discuss the real reason you were hired." James felt Amelia tense beside him. She'd been summoned too, though he hadn't known why. King Edmund explained. For months, the palace had experienced security breaches. Documents had gone missing. Blueprints of the royal vault. Inventories of the crown jewels. Someone on the inside was feeding information to external parties, possibly a foreign operative wanting to destabilize the monarchy. The royal family had implemented an unconventional solution, the Fox Pups. Bred in secret and trained by the palace's most trusted handlers, the Pups had been conditioned to identify individuals with integrity and courage through subtle behavioral cues and sensory perception. It was part instinct, part training, part something more mysterious that the handlers couldn't fully explain. "The Pups chose you," Eleanor said, leaning forward with intensity. "Every test, every situation, they chose you, which means you have the one thing we desperately need. Trustworthiness. We need your help," the king said directly. "Someone is moving against the crown. We need someone with military experience, tactical knowledge, and the trust of everyone in this palace. That's you." James's first instinct was to refuse. He'd spent 30 years in conflict and wanted nothing more than peace. But he looked at Amelia, at the king's worried face, at the weight of responsibility in the room. "What do you need?" he asked. Over the next days, James conducted his own investigation, using techniques from his military days. He reviewed security footage, studied patterns of access, interviewed staff carefully. The palace was a vast organism, and someone within it was working to destroy it. His breakthrough came when he noticed something in the third-floor hallway. scratches around a security panel that didn't quite match the other wear on the walls. Fresh. Within the last week, James staked out the location during night hours. On the third night, he saw a movement, a figure in dark clothing, accessing the panel with a key card. James's military reflexes kicked in. He moved silently, cornering the figure before they could flee. It was Thomas Westbrook, the palace's assistant curator and one of James's few acquaintances. The man fought viciously, but James was stronger, more experienced. Within minutes, Thomas was restrained. But the real shock came when Thomas laughed, bitter, vicious laughter. "You think you've won?" Thomas spat. "There are others. This goes beyond the palace. You just made things worse." Thomas was taken into custody, and James reported back to the king. But the implications were disturbing. This wasn't just about theft. It was about destabilization. Someone powerful wanted the monarchy weakened. That night, alone with Amelia in his cottage, James held her close. She'd been asked to serve as medical supervisor for Thomas's detention, giving her access to information that made her increasingly alarmed. "There's something more," she whispered against his chest. "I overheard Victoria on the phone. They're worried this goes higher than anyone inside the palace. Someone is orchestrating this from outside." James pulled back to look at her. "Then this isn't over." "No," Amelia agreed. "It's just beginning." The following morning, the palace was placed on high alert. The 5 fox pups, sensing the shift in atmosphere, became unusually restless. They stayed close to James, almost protective. The smallest one, with white-tipped ears, had begun a new behavior. She positioned herself at James's side constantly, her body tense, her senses heightened. The pups knew what was coming before anyone else did. The truth emerged slowly, through intelligence briefings and careful investigation. Thomas Westbrook had been recruited by an international crime syndicate with connections to depose royal families and corrupt government officials across 3 continents. Their goal: destabilize the British monarchy by acquiring and publicly releasing classified documents that would embarrass and delegitimize the crown. In an age of political fragmentation, they believed a weakened monarchy would trigger constitutional crisis. Thomas was merely a pawn. The real orchestrator was someone else entirely, someone with access to high-level intelligence and resources to remain invisible. James was given a newly created position, Chief Security Advisor. The title was official enough to be credible, but vague enough to allow him operational freedom. He had access to all palace security systems, staff files, and was authorized to implement new protocols. Amelia became his partner in more ways than one. With her position as physician, she had legitimate reasons to interview staff and observe behaviors that might indicate suspicious activity or loyalty concerns. Their relationship, once private, became part of their cover story. A senior staff member falling for the new security chief was perfectly normal, but the intimacy between them deepened beyond strategy. One evening, in the secure quarters they'd been given in the palace, Amelia asked him something serious. "Do you love me?" she asked, her usual confidence replaced with vulnerability. James pulled her close. "Yes. Terrifies me, but yes." "Good," she whispered, kissing him with intensity that spoke of relief and passion in equal measure. They made love with the urgency of people who understood how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. Afterward, lying entwined in the darkness, Amelia traced patterns on his chest. "When this is over, what happens to us?" "Whatever you want," James said simply. "I'm done running from things that matter." The investigation accelerated. James identified 3 additional palace employees with suspicious financial records and unusual communications patterns. 2 were removed quietly. The third, a communications specialist named Gregory Wells, became their primary focus. Wells had the most access, the most opportunity. More importantly, he had motive. His sister had been involved in a custody dispute with a royal family member years ago, a minor scandal that Wells blamed on royal interference. James set a trap. With the king's authorization, they planted classified documents, forgeries of critical importance, in the communications hub where Wells worked. They monitored his reaction carefully. Wells took the bait. He attempted to transmit the documents to an encrypted email address. But James had already arranged for the transmission to be intercepted and traced. It led to an address in Prague, to a network, to a connection that reached into European intelligence services and criminal organizations simultaneously. The complexity was staggering, but now they had a thread to pull. Queen Isabel called James and Amelia to her private chambers. "You've done extraordinary work," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "My husband wants to know what you'd like as compensation." James shook his head. "I don't need anything beyond what we've already arranged." "Then what about her?" the Queen asked, looking at Amelia with knowing eyes. "What does she need?" Amelia squeezed James's hand. "To stay with him. Everything else is secondary." The Queen smiled. "That can be arranged." That night, as James and Amelia prepared for bed, the 5 fox pups were brought to their quarters, officially for security purposes, though James suspected it was the Queen's way of blessing their union. The smallest pup, with white-tipped ears, curled up between them, and James suddenly understood something profound. The pups hadn't just been testing him for character. They'd been preparing him. In their presence, his defenses had lowered. His capacity for connection had expanded. He'd become the man the palace needed, not because he'd changed, but because he'd allowed himself to be seen. The pups' training wasn't just about identifying courage and integrity. It was about transforming those qualities into something actionable. Healing the wound. Outside their quarters, guards maintained vigil. The investigation continued. But for this one night, James Hartley, soldier, guardian, and finally, a man capable of love, slept peacefully with 2 lives entwined with his own. The European intelligence operation took 3 months to fully unravel. James worked with MI6 and Interpol, coordinating across borders to identify and neutralize the threats. It was dangerous, meticulous work that occasionally took him away from the palace for days at a time. Each departure was harder. Each return was a relief, so profound it physically ached. Amelia waited for him each time, sometimes with anger at his absence, sometimes with simple, quiet acceptance. They argued about the danger he courted. They reconciled with intensity that left them both breathless. They built something real in the margins of his mission. The breakthrough came when they identified the mastermind, a former MI6 agent named Adrian Blackwell, who'd been passed over for promotion in favor of a candidate with royal connections. Over 20 years, his resentment had calcified into something pathological. He'd built an entire operation around revenge. The operation to apprehend Blackwell was coordinated across 5 countries. James was there in Prague when agents moved in to arrest him. There was a standoff, a moment where everything hung in balance. Blackwell was armed, desperate, willing to die rather than face imprisonment. James, trained in negotiation after decades of conflict, stepped forward. "It's over," James said simply. "You've lost. Let it end with dignity." For a moment, Blackwell seemed to consider it. Then something shifted in his expression, acceptance, or perhaps recognition that his crusade had been futile all along. He lowered the weapon. 3 weeks later, James was in the palace gardens with Amelia when the king found them. Edmund was smiling, genuinely, warmly. "The last of the network was dismantled this morning," the king said. "The threats are neutralized. The palace is secure." "And then," James asked, "and then," Edmund said meaningfully, "you get to choose your next chapter." That evening, James stood with Amelia in the gardens where he'd first kissed her. The 5 fox pups played around them, chasing each other through the grass with the exuberance of young animals no longer burdened with secret purposes. "I'm leaving," James said. Amelia's hand tensed in his. "What?" "I'm leaving the palace," he continued, "but not leaving you. There's a cottage about an hour north. Gardens, privacy, space. I want to spend time with you, without this context, without the mission, without the palace watching." Relief flooded Amelia's face. "Yes, God, yes. And I want it to be permanent," James added. "If you'll have me." He produced a ring. Nothing ostentatiously royal, just simple gold with a clear stone that caught the evening light. Amelia began to laugh, then cry. "Yes," she said. "Always yes." They kissed under the stars while the 5 fox pups, their guides, their tests, their unexpected family, tumbled around them happily. At the palace, Queen Isabel and King Edmund watched from the upper windows. The queen squeezed her husband's hand. "The pups knew," she said softly. "They usually do," Edmund agreed. The smallest pup, with white-tipped ears, glanced back at the palace one final time, as if confirming something important. Then she returned her attention to the man and woman who'd chosen each other despite the darkness that had threatened to consume them both. Epilogue. 6 months later. The cottage was everything James had imagined. Amelia had transformed it into something warm and alive, filled with books and light and music. They'd married quietly, just the two of them and a magistrate, with the 5 fox pups as witnesses. The smallest pup had come with them, a gift from the queen, who'd somehow known James would want her. She had a name now, Ember. On a quiet morning, as James worked in the gardens and Amelia read on the porch, she called out to him. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. James set down his tools and walked to her, kneeling before her chair. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," she confirmed, pulling him close. Ember, sensing the moment's importance, rose from her napping spot and pressed against them both, as if offering blessing and protection. In the distance, the palace stood magnificent against the sky. James had chosen to step away from that world, but not from purpose. He'd found something greater than missions and duty. He'd found belonging. The fox pups had known all along. They'd recognized in him not just a guardian for the palace, but a capacity to guard a heart, to have his own guarded in return. Some discoveries, James had learned, required no words. They simply required the courage to stop running and turn toward what was real. And sometimes the most powerful magic was simply allowing yourself to be loved.